Okay, Team Impact. Welcome to Data and Statistics. Um, Go ahead and put your name on it. You just got the packet there. I'm going to watch a video today. So if you like numbers, you like a calculator, you like just grinding out computation, this is your chapter. Let's flip it over and talk about today statistical questions and data. Okay. And there's a lot of vocab today, so it's not a lot of data per se, but what it is, all right, is a lot of kind of vocabulary and just kind of grouping things into information here. So we're on student handout one. Homework will be one as well. All right, let's get after it today. Here we go. Okay, data can be described as a collection of facts. Okay. For example, it's numbers, measurements, observations, and descriptions. Okay. Right? In our data, we can look at it two different ways. We can look at it as categorical data, and this data represents characteristics and is often sorted into groups. Okay, so if you think of a deck of cards, if we put them into groups, we put them into red cards or black cards or spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds, things like that. That would be categorical data. Numerical data is data that represents values that can be measured. Okay. Meaning this, excuse me, I got a little bit of a cold. Meaning this, if we took that same data that we put into the four groups or the or club spades, uh, different suits. The way we measure that is through their representation. We have a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 of each of those, clear up to a king and a queen and an ace, right? So we can measure those by their value, right? So numerical is measuring it by their value. Categorical is putting it into the correct suit. Okay. So we're going to read each statement to determine if it is referring to categorical or numerical data. Okay. So let's see what we got. First one up. I am collecting data to determine each student's favorite genre of book to read. Genre of book to read. Well, to me, when we talk about a genre of our book, we're talking about a characteristic. So we're talking about categorical data, right? We're talking about categorical. So Luke, all right, is categorical because we can put it into groups. He's putting it into groups, genres, groups. DeMarcus. I am collecting data to determine how many hours of sleep each student in our class gets. How many hours is absolutely numerical. We can measure that, right? We can measure that. The number of hours, right, can be measured. That's something that we can count. Okay, Josie. I'm collecting data to determine how much money each student's family spends on groceries each week. Well, certainly, if we're looking at how much they spend, that's something that's measured. So that again is numerical. Okay, and I guess I'll put in there just money. Heather says I am collecting data on the color of cars that run the stoplight in front of our house. The color of cars. All right, so when we look at the color, we're putting them into different groups, which is categorical categories, right? Okay, and again, we're groups of colors, right? Okay, so again, these two were categorical because we put them into groups. This was of colors. Luke was of genre, groups of genre. Let's put that down there. Genre is the type of book: fiction, nonfiction, autobiography, and so on. DeMarcus and Josie were numerical data because it was the number of hours and the amount of money. That's something that we could count, we can measure, right? Okay, let's continue on here. I'll pull that up a little bit. Identify two numerical or two categorical sets that could be observed about a standard deck of playing cards. Standard deck. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, but you know, one would be the different color of cards. Right? So that puts them into a category. And another one would be the suits, right? Different suits. And suits are, diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades. Numerical data out of this is I guess you could look at all right the number of face cards. All right, so we could look at the number of face cards. We could count those, right? We can measure those, meaning how many aces are there, kings, queens, jacks. Those are called face cards. And then maybe the other one we could just say how many red cards are there and how many black cards are there. All right, number of red and number of black. Okay, so that's something that can be measured or counted, right? Okay, pretty good start so far. Let's flip it. Excuse me. Oh boy, this cold's got me down here. For a question, okay, we're going to start talking about statistical questions here. For a question to be considered statistical, it must meet two criteria. The question must be able to be answered by data. It must be supported. You must have analytics behind it. And the data must vary. Meaning you have to have more than one source. So think of it this way. If I asked how many people lived in a house here and only one student answered, I wouldn't have a varying amount of data. All right. All right. So it's not statistical. I need to have more than one source. So an example of this would be how many pets do the students in sixth grade at Neil Armstrong have? How many pets do the sixth grade students have at NAMS? So why is that statistical? Well, the question can be answered with data because I would survey everybody and I have more than one response. I would have probably 3, 4, 500 responses. So it is data that is going to vary. It's supported by data that is questions that are answered by data. It's supported by data from multiple people, right? Task 2. And this gets a little tricky here now, so stay with me. Determine if each of the questions below are statistical or not, and rewrite any non-statistical question to be statistical. First one, how many times a week do you go to football practice? How many times a week do you go to football practice? You. Well, that when I see this word you, that tells me it's not statistical. It's not because there's not a varying amount of data, right? An example to change this would be how many times a week do sixth graders go to football practice? So how many times a week do sixth graders go to practice? Okay. Now it's statistical because it's more than one, right? It's plural. Number 2, on average, how many hours of sleep do you get each night? And I think you're starting to understand it. This word you tells us it's not statistical because it's not enough data varying, right? So on average, how many hours of sleep do students in PE class get per week? So we need to change this around to on average. Okay. How many hours of sleep Excuse me. Man, I'm struggling here. How many hours of sleep do the students in, let's say, math class get? Okay, excuse me. I need to blow my nose. I'm going to pause this for a second here. Okay, sorry about that. Number 3, what is the maximum number of free throw shots students on the basketball team can make in a row? Students, right there, varying amount, a lot of data. That is a statistical question. Bang. Create both a statistical and a non-statistical question on your own. Okay, and I'll pause. Okay, so hopefully you came up with something. Statistical for me is, I would say, how many students in the class have an SUV, right? How many students in the class have an SUV, right? Question mark. What is not statistical? Well, a non-statistical question would be, focusing on one student. So, do you have an SUV? You. That's non-statistical. Statistical, varying amount of data. Okay. Task 3. Draw a line from each question to the best description of the question. Not all choices will be used. Okay, so first up, let's take a little peek here. How much were monthly utilities for each house in the neighborhood? Okay, so they want to know, is it numerical? So if we go back, let's go back to our vocab. A numerical question is that represents values that can be measured. Can it be measured? One, and is there a varying amount of data? So how much were monthly utilities for each house in the neighborhood? So it is statistical. It's more than one house. And could it be measured? Yes. So absolutely, it's numerical and statistic. Okay. The numbers can be measured, and the statistical number has a varying amount of data. All right, next one. How many siblings do you have? Okay. So can that be measured? Yeah, sure. Sure, it can be measured. You have 2, you have 3, you have 4 siblings. But all right, is it a varying amount of data? No, it's just you. So it's not statistical, but it is numerical. So you can see it can be numerical and not statistical because it can be measured, but there's only one piece, you. What is each student's favorite restaurant in my class? Okay, so I think we're getting this. All right. We certainly think that's a statistical question. What is each student's? It's more than one, right? But what is each student's favorite restaurant in my class? All right. So is that something that can be measured? Can we count that? No, what we're doing is we're putting it into groups. If you remember, when we put things into groups, it was called categorical. All right. This data represents characteristics and is often sorted into groups. So we're putting them into groups of restaurants, right? Italian, steak, fast food. So to me, it's categorical, okay, but it's also statistical. So a little nebulous there. We got to think it through and we have to refer back to our vocabulary here. All right, so let's flip it over. And you don't have a lot of homework. Homework 1, all right, make sure you're doing this. And by the way, I'm going to check that all of this is done tomorrow. So make sure that you filled all that in with me. You have to do the vocabulary to understand data and statistics. Have a good day.